Video is about factors affecting the global pattern of vegetation, and our lesson goal is going to be able to explain why vegetation occurs in certain places of the world. So by the end of the video, I want you to be able to explain why vegetation types are different and explain those patterns. There's four main reasons, and they're going to be categorized in each of the slides. So let's look at the first one. The first reason is climatic factors. Obviously, this is where we start looking at biophysical interactions, start looking at the interaction between the spheres. We've got climate, and we're talking about biosphere, so that obviously would be biosphere as well as atmosphere. Now, for plants to live, we need two main things. We need water, we need sun. So let's have a look at some of the factors here. So precipitation. So availability of water is one of the most important factors. Without water, plants don't grow. It's considered to be the limiting factor that determines the biomes of the world's surface. Two factors that affect water are timing and intensity. So if plants don't get water frequently to do with time, then they aren't. There's not going to be as many of them. And then the intensity. If the rain is short, sharp, like we have in the desert, obviously it's going to have some big effects on the type of plants that we get there. So when we're talking about rainfall, they need lots of it and at a long period of time. Temperature. For each plant, there's an optimum temperature, and that's takes millions of years to adapt to. Most plants like 16 degrees Celsius to 35 degrees Celsius. Anything above that or below that, we start to see a decrease in the number of vegetation species, and also things like flowering plants, deciduous plants. So deciduous plant or deciduous tree that we have in the northern hemispheres, when the tree loses its leaves during winter time, and that's because there's a lack of light, there's a lack of rain, and so on. Then we have light. All plants require light, so the intensity of light determines the amount of energy available for photosynthesis. Hence, like my past example, in some places around the world where they have long winters, and in long winters we have short days, the amount of vegetation decreases, and it impacts what type of vegetation we have there. And then wind has little impact on vegetation. If a strong wind prevails, then this can have a detrimental effect on the vegetation. You'll see it with some of the trees on the central coast where there's prevailing wind. It's a wind where it comes in a certain direction for a long period of time. Trees are actually bent over in that particular way. Is topographic factors. Now we've got altitude. Now altitude is the height above sea level. As we know, as we go up in altitude, the temperature decreases, and that's called a lapse rate. As altitude increases, there's a notable decrease in the number of plant species, the height of plants, density of plants, growth rate of plants, and length of growing season. So if we look at, say, somewhere in Australia like the Snowy Mountains, during the summer, lots of vegetation. But then in the winter, when we have snow, it's going to reduce the number of plants, heights, and so on, what I've just read. So it's not just in colder countries, we do have areas in Australia as well that do the same thing. The slope, so the steeper the slope, the less amount of stable land is able for plants to use. So that's why we don't have lots of trees and plants up the top of the mountain. And then aspect, the direction in which the land faces is an important part of impact on vegetation. So if on a hillside, if it causes a shadow, if you're underneath that shadow, then you're not going to get as much light, temperatures are going to decrease, and so on. So we have lots of local variations as well as global patterns of vegetation as well. The next one is soil-related features. Now, most plants are dependent on soils. Vegetation has an impact on soil characteristics. So soil and vegetation have a mutual relationship. Obviously, where there's better soils, we're going to have more plants, different types of plants. Whereas there is poorer soils, not as much vegetation. And then we have biotic factors. So plant competition. Plants are always in competition with each other. Some plants, like some plants, have beneficial relationships, like the mycorrhizae fungi, and that feeds off another plant. We have parasite plants, lots of them in Australia, like vines, that feed off a tree and eventually kill off the tree. Relationship between plants and animals. Species of animals have adapted to one another. Again, plants and animals also have beneficial relationship, like the hummingbird. Hummingbird takes the pollen out of the plant that it likes to eat and then distributes it elsewhere. And it's those activities that help both animals and plants to live in harmony, as well as preserving the number of species of each of those plants and animals. And then obviously human activities. Most significant of all biotic factors, increased population has led to a decrease in the biosphere. Why is that? Because we live in cities. When we have cities, we knock down trees, vegetation, that type of thing. Okay, that's the main reasons for the contributing factors of different types of vegetation. Remember, this is very general. We do always have exceptions to the rule, and it does depend on local impacts as well. So when we're looking at vegetation, remember that, and remember that there's always vegetation, even in the middle of the desert, but we have to look hard for it because it's taken a lot of time and effort for that plant to adapt. Okay, I hope you got a lot out of that. Make sure you make your Cornell notes. Thanks. Bye.